Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. I'm so glad you could join us here on a different night because I didn't have electricity for a number of days. So this is, I think, one of the few times we've done a Thursday show, but, you know, it feels just like a Monday to me. I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro, as always. Please check him out on the Internet. He is a native storyteller, and his story and the stories he tells are profound, and they preserve history and cosmology in a very unique way, a way that I think maybe we'd be better off with, because books, especially the dusty ones that are dry historically, are not as much fun as listening to someone weave a story in front of a campfire. Not that we're going to use campfires, but the dining room table works just as well. Please do check him out. I have tonight with me Wallace Wagner, who has written a wonderful book called Within Grasp. It's his second book. We spoke with him about his first book, and I'm very excited about this one for a reason that will become obvious in a little while. Let me tell you a bit about it. Ancient aliens believer and biblical intellectual Wallace Wagner shares his continuing journey down his path, a path he realized was set in front of him once he left the confines of established Western Christianity. After learning he was being led down the path, he shares each of his newly discovered realities in a gentle and informative way. We'll learn about his beliefs in the definition of God, reincarnation, the soul and spirit, death, ancient visitors, time, frequency, the Bible as it is currently written, the brain and heart, prayer and meditation, and, holy crap, a whole bunch more. He has in his book interesting interviews with Ancient Aliens contributor, author, and pastor, Reverend Michael J.S. Carter, who's been on this show a number of times and is an absolutely fabulous person. Former pastor, author, and Ancient Aliens contributor, Dr. Reverend Barry Downing. He was the first pastor to formally declare UFOs in the Bible. A spiritual empath, Barbara Delong, who is also an author, documentarian, and artist. And yes, that's me. I get to be in the book, too. Another great reason to read it. A Project Stargate remote viewer, Dr. Paul H. Smith, Major U.S. Army retired, who also shares some of his Mormon beliefs, and a layperson that he didn't know who sets the stage on typical current Christian beliefs. While he uses the analogy of a pond and lily pads to establish his points, meaning to offend no one, his views on the Bible and God are quite telling and informative. He's a former Southern conservative Christian who's held virtually all the positions in the church. He's ordained, has been baptized in the Jordan, and is now self-taught with interest in early church history, Bible history, NDEs, that's near-death experiences, and, of course, UFOs and the Bible. So, open your mind, eyes and ears. For those who have eyes, let them see. For those who have ears, let them hear. And for those whose minds are open, let them understand. Immerse yourself in things seen and unseen within the grasp. You may just realize we've been previously led down the path with our blinders on. So welcome to the show, Wally. So glad you could join me tonight.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm very glad to share some time with you, and I've never had such an in-depth introduction as you provided.
Oh, well, it doesn't even explain how multitasked you are and how great the variety of the things that you've experienced in your life. And I think it's important for people to understand that, quote unquote, ordinary people like you have extraordinary experiences, and it changes their lives forever. And I do believe, and I don't even know if we talked about this, but you have spoken about. I'll get the right tense yet. That your life really changed with a UFO sighting, and so did mine.
Wow!
I don't know if you knew
that
that
has a
one landed
propensity to happen to people.
Oh yeah, one landed on my campus when I was in college in 65, 66. So tell us about your experience and how it shifted your consciousness.
Well, my experience happened back in 2016. I was a mailman at the time. I had just made a delivery here in Bedford County. I'm in between Roanoke and Lynchburg. And something or somebody connected with me, let me put it that way, and told me to stop and immediately look up. And that's exactly what I did. I was out in the lady's front yard, and I stopped and looked up, and over my head was what we now know as a white tic-tac variety of UFO. It had no windows, no nacelles, no wings, no sound. It appeared as a gleaming white oblong object that should not have been there. Now, I got to see it for about 3 seconds, and then it either cloaked, took off so fast I couldn't see it, or perhaps went into another dimension. And I decided that it really cloaked. It was perhaps still there. I just couldn't see it. You know, that really changed me over the years. And these last 6 years have distilled a word. It really enlightened me. It's changed a lot of my core beliefs and a lot of my foundational beliefs. You know, I was a Southern Christian at the time, teaching Sunday school, and you know, pretty much believed everything I was taught and everything that was in the Bible. And now let's just say that I have a much more open mind than I did before, and I see things differently now than I did before. And I guess we can get into that.
Yeah, I think, did you ever see Close Encounters of a Third Kind?
About 4 times.
Okay, me too. But in the very, very end of the movie, when the hero they're prepping him to go onto the UFO, and people are saying, but he's not trained, he's not this, he's not that, and one of the people says, but he was invited. And that's what I think happens with people that see UFOs and aren't terrified. They're invited to expand intelligence and understanding, and I think in a way, actually seeing one, and certainly you don't have to see one to be a believer and all of that, but I do think that in some ways, for those of us that have seen them, it's almost like it's a calling, it's an invitation, it's saying, okay, wake up to another dimension of thought, wisdom, and understanding.
And I can go along with that wholeheartedly.
It shifts you tremendously, and again, that kind of a shift or awakening can happen with or without a UFO, but it suddenly wakes you up to, is there more? So after you saw that, did you begin investigating them? Did you begin shifting your change of research? What happened to you?
Well, I no longer accepted being taught, and I started teaching myself. And in doing so, all kinds of doors have been opened. First of all, it was Reverend Michael Carter who told me I'm on a path.
Uh-huh.
And, I really realized that probably 6 months after he said that I really am on a path. And as I'm going down this path, I'm leaving virtually, I don't want to say everything, but a lot of what I have been taught in the past behind me that I won't even fool with again, because for me right now, it's nothing but poppycock. It's incorrect information, incomplete information, or no information at all because they don't want to mention it, because it doesn't fit the agenda. I have really learned, Barbara, that what's being taught in theology schools today, and I have not been to theology school, so I want to make that clear, but I've certainly been around a lot of preachers, a lot of pastors, a lot of teachers from virtually all faiths, and for the most part, they are still teaching what the early church put together, 1,600 years ago, 1,700 years ago. And it really hasn't changed. And there's very little room to sway on either side of what's being taught. You're either considered, to be a wacko, or you're so far out there that, you're not even accepted into the group. I don't want to use the term closed-minded. I guess I just did, but in a way, I considered that I had blinders on. A lot of people like to be taught. They like to be led around. That's their reality. They don't want to do research for themselves. They would rather be taught, and that's fine. But you're going to have to accept what you're being taught, and that becomes your reality.
Yeah.
And it may not be correct. And I have found out, Barbara, that it's not correct. There's a lot of stuff that that's in the Bible today and is being taught today that was not the same as it was in the early church. And it's certainly not what I consider truth that I have uncovered now since I've been on this path. So, I don't even know where to start.
Well, I agree with you. I think that I do believe what I think happened was that there have been wonderful teachings by master teachers who were so spiritually aware it was magical, and that they were here to help us to take the next step in evolution. And what happened
exactly.
And what happened, in my opinion, is that people were so in awe, instead of rolling their sleeves up and digging even deeper, they just took it at face value, created a religion, and were locked into that religion. And that I think it's happened with the teachings of the Buddha and then Jesus. So many of these wonderfully spiritually enlightened beings that were on the planet to help share their wisdom, I really think they'd be horrified to see what has been done with their wisdom I think
you are so correct.
Yeah, but at some point, I think at some point early on, I do believe there was an attempt to get information down so that other people could benefit from it, and the decades and the eons and the centuries that have passed, it's all locked into what those people started with, and I do believe that these master teachers gave us the beginning, and we are supposed to take it and go further with it instead of just saying, oh, this is all there is, so this is what we worship. So I think today there are people like you and like Michael Carter and me on a different way, but similar, that are taking those wisdoms and expanding them into an understanding, not just of our physical reality, but of our spiritual reality as well.
That's very well said. I want to go back to what you mentioned about Buddha and a lot of these teachers. It's really, and the religions are culture dependent and country dependent. Every country pretty much had its own culture and own gods around the world. And these gods had miraculous powers in order to become gods. A lot of them flew. They all came from the sky, or most of them came from the sky. And the reason we have what we have here is the Greek, of course, the Jewish religions morphed into, through England, and it came over and became our, basis for our religion in this country. But in doing so, we basically did away with all the Indians and Aborigines that were already here. The Apache, for example, they thought creation came from a little man with a beard who flew in a craft. One side was yellow and the other side was white. And that craft they actually called a disc. That was part of their belief structure. And a lot of the different Indian tribes have very similar, not exact, but similar renditions, and they use different names and whatnot. But we in this country think that the Judeo-Christian religion is total truth because of Christ, and then everything else around the world is just a religion. That's what was taught to me. That's what I absorbed, and now I know that that's not true. All these other religions had spiritual people that came to teach us, like Buddha. The list goes on wherever you're at. And we're still here. They didn't come to destroy us. They came to teach us, to help us evolve. And like you said, it's a process of growing. But unfortunately, I don't see that happening if you're confined with the religious dogma that Christianity has. I don't see anybody growing. And I if you'll allow me, I want to read something I put in within Grasp. I really worked on this. It's the first one I have under the section Quotes Worth Noting. It's actually on page 190. And I'm painting with a wide brush, but I say priests, vicars, rabbis, pastors, rectors, preachers, ministers, and all Bible teachers should be commended for endeavoring to improve society. Unfortunately, they are teaching from an ancient and deep-rooted agenda which is still being taught in seminaries. They are also teaching from purchased material which supports the same agenda. This agenda originated with the male canonist and in the early organized church, an agenda in which many truths have been purposely extinguished, an agenda which promulgates power to the collective church and not the individual. You see, for me now, I realize I'm a little God. I never realized that before. And if you would say that in a Sunday school or in a Christian setting, you're considered New Age and taboo. So
yeah.
you can see that's just one area where everything's turned around for me. And my belief structure that I'm a little God, for me, is even, mentioned in the Bible, that we'll do greater works than Jesus did. And the problem is we don't have the real good teachers now. Who's our teacher now? I mean, you've got to do the study yourself and back up and see what these teachers were teaching.
Well, but isn't that part of? I think one of the things after college and 2 master's degrees, I after a while realized I hadn't learned anything, and I mean, pay raise every time I got another 30 hours of extra credit in at college, but I hadn't learned anything, and it's everything that I know today. I learned myself. I taught myself.
Bingo.
I researched, and I really believe that were there a Christ or a master teacher on the planet here today, they would turn them. They would turn them into a religion all over again, and the important thing is that seems to be our habit. So-and-so has more power, that's therefore we worship them, we pay attention to what they say instead of questioning ourselves. So I think that we're at a place in evolution where it behooves us to stretch and to grow and to understand and to apply to ourselves and our own journeys. And everybody's journey is different. I can write down chapter and verse and step by step as to where and how I got to where I am today, and if someone else followed it just to the letter, they would not be where I am today. It's my journey.
I'm sure of that. We're all on our own path.
Exactly, and our spirits are on different levels of awareness, and our spirits are on the planet at this point in time to learn different lessons, and we are drawing to ourselves those situations that will evolve us into a greater depth of understanding of life as we know it. But my lesson isn't your lesson or Mark's lesson or anybody else's lesson. So I think we're at a point in time where it's all on an individual basis, and most people want a group. They don't want to do it alone. At least that's what I've experienced. I mean, it's sort of like you and I could get together and have wonderful, discussions with congregants and stuff like that, but they'd be hearing our truth, not their truth. So, it's...
Well, there's about 9 million people on the planet now, and what you say is so true. No 2 of them are on the same level of evolution, and they're all on their own paths.
And that doesn't mean you can't get together, sing songs, and feel a wonderful energy with a group. But to be told to be given something as truth and to follow it blindly, it's so scary. I mean, I love the singing in church. I love listening to a pastor give his opinion on something. I don't always agree with it, but it's nice to hear another opinion. And, when I go to church with my son...
You sit there and critique them.
I do. Actually, when I go to church with my son and daughter-in-law, afterwards my son will say, well, what do you have to say? And his minister will come up and look at me and say, what did I say wrong? And, and I'll tell him. And quite often... I know once he was talking about the 10 Commandments, and I said, there have to be 613 commandments. Why do you only talk about 10? And my son looked at me like I was crazy, and the minister said, well, she's right, John. I mean, talk about how much you can sell your daughter for. That was one of the commandments. Tell me, Why can't I wear linen and cotton at the same time? I'd love to know the answer to that one. But so it's. I think spiritual awareness is something wonderful to talk about with people. But
it was Buddha himself that said it is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles, and that is so true.
And that's
I want our listeners to know that we have a very long delay between us talking. I'm sensing it's about 3 or 4 seconds, so I don't mean to overtalk you.
No, that's okay. Oh, I'm used to that. It's not a big deal. But I think that's really important for people to understand. Buddha had wonderful things to say. Zoroaster, Jesus, I mean, so many of them had such wonderful things you can apply to your life. They weren't rules. They weren't laws. They were philosophies. And a philosophy is applied to everyone differently according to their level of awareness. So, I think it's important for us
that. That's truth to me.
Me too, for now. I may change by the end of the show, but, right now, it's... I think that's something
just shows
else.
Maturity that you're willing to be changeable.
Oh, yeah. When I think of where I was 30, 40 years ago and where I am today, I haven't reached the mountaintop by any shape or form, but my journey has been fascinating, and there have been times that there have been some real golden moments. But my gosh, if we don't continue to grow, there's no point to being down here. And I'm not advocating people killing themselves. I'm just saying there's always something new to pick up, to learn, to understand, to enhance yourself and your reality. And I think people who just go to church one day a week are missing out on another 6 days of growing.
Well, I made mention of that in my first book, Don't Be a Sunday Christian.
Yeah. Unless, of course, that's the only time you get a good nap. And if that's the case, then you use it for that. But it's an exciting, your book I loved. I love the lily pad analogy. And, it's interesting because in my life, I can see times where literally I jump to another level, another lily pad, if you want, and it's fascinating. I think in my life, every 10 years or so, I take one of these leaps, and it's not exactly 10 years, but 7 to 10 years. In that way, I change my life dramatically, and I focus in new directions. So it's very exciting. I think people have to realize that your faith grows with you. It isn't, it isn't the same as it was when you were in school. I mean, every decade there's a new level of understanding to the faith that you carry forward, in my opinion. I have to keep saying in my opinion.
Well, I would concur with that.
It's so exciting. And I think, how you've looked at the Bible and how you have looked at especially the Old Testament. I mean, I love the Old Testament. There's just such cool stuff in there.
There's a lot of cool stuff for sure, but it's just not the same for me as it used to be.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And in your book, you kind of banish your belief of the Old Testament God and explain how you came to that conclusion and the fact that obviously it's the Old Testament God. It's not the over God. Let's call it the over God, the source of all creation.
The big God.
The source
of
big
all
God.
creation.
Big Gene. Yeah.
Well, the big God that I believe is referenced to in the New Testament that is not referenced to in the Old Testament. The New Testament says God is light. God is love, and God is spirit. Well, hardly any of that applies to the God in the Old Testament. Definitely he was a God. Definitely he had powers. Definitely he flew around in a craft. But this God in the Old Testament was omni-nothing. And we're taught that God is omni-everything. So one of the biggest issues that I've had to face is, who is God? I mean, you might have 100 people in the congregation, and I'm wondering if they're all praying to the same God when you pray to God. Because I am not praying to the Jewish God, because he was a local Canaanite God, much the same as you might consider Zoroaster or Vishnu or Quetzalcoatl or around the world, wherever country you're in, they have their own gods. He was just a local God to me. That's what I have learned in doing my own studies. And, that God in the Old Testament walks. That God in the Old Testament murders. He wants to murder. That God in the Old Testament takes perhaps one of his best followers in Job and on a whim or on a bet causes Job to lose his 10 children. And then what happens? He replaces the 10 children with 10 other children.
Yeah.
I mean, and then doubles his material things, as if material things are supposed to be bad, but he gets doubled, his cattle and all that. Well, what happened to the first 10 children? I mean, that just doesn't fit with me. I mean, it's crazy is what it is. And I've done a lot of study, a lot of research myself. And the study and research you do, it's not from a Christian bookstore, because it's not in there. It doesn't fit the agenda. It's from outside sources, other books, other websites, other online material. It's out there, but you've got to go searching for it. And one of the things I've found that resonates with me, and again, this is just me that I have found on this path, is gods are plural. Sons of gods are plural. There were multiple gods all through the Levant. Even Joshua made a temple to El. El was the chief Canaanite god. He didn't make it to Yahweh. He made it to El and called it Beth-El, meaning house of God. And the more that this opened up for me, I could see that this Yahweh God flew wherever he went to. He had a consort wherever he went, and that consort could have been named Ashura, or Queen of Heaven. Ashura was removed from all the writings of the Bible. It was a male canonist, male world back then. Females were basically, well, I hate to say this now, but it doesn't apply now, but mere chattel. I mean, that's mentioned all throughout the Old Testament. It was a man's world, and we wanted the one man, one God scenario, and that's what the church was formed on. And that's what we have in this country today, but that's not biblical. Biblical is there were gods everywhere. And in fact, if you read the book of Joshua, you'll see that these gods had defined boundaries. I mean, you might cross a river and have another god. You may go across a mountain and have another god. So these gods are everywhere, and they all had powers. Now, studying Yahweh found out that pretty much he was probably someone that the Kenites venerated, involved with the smelting of copper. That's probably it. He was also mentioned by some scholars to be the war god or god of war. I mean, that just fits right in with being carried around in a box. I mean, what kind of god has to be carried around in a box to win wars? What kind of god in Exodus lands his craft, gets out, and starts having to look for Moses? Now, Moses, the one that's the deliverer that brings the Hebrews out of Egypt. But he doesn't know where he is, so he's having to get out and walk on the ground looking for him. And why was he trying to find him? He was going to murder him face to face. And you can envision. Yeah, go ahead.
But not only that, but what kind of God demands of a nation, worship me or I'll wipe you off the face of the earth? I mean, that's not how you get people to...
He scared them into compliance. Thunders, lightnings, bolts, earthquakes, all of that. And then he punished them every time they made a mistake. I mean, it's crazy. And this God is supposed to be forgiving and loving and full of grace and on and on and on. And none of it applies to the God in the Old Testament. None of it. So this is just stuff that's coming to me now, and I see such a 180-degree difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament that the two books shouldn't even be bound together on one book. The Jewish nation or Israel should have their own book. The Greeks and whoever follows that should have their own New Testament.
I think that's true, and I think what's fascinating is that the New Testament was written before the Old Testament, so that they had to create a story to support the New Testament, or the Jewish faith felt that they had to put their history in some sort of order as well to sort of balance out what was coming out in the New Testament. I think that Jerome
had a real balancing act on his hands, Barbara, trying to appease the Jews, trying to appease the Greeks, trying to appease the canonists and the new church, all trying to get it together. And it was just, it's no wonder he lived in a cave and was a hermit.
Well, how can you put in writing the essence of faith? It just doesn't transfer into words. But I think what gets me is, where did all these guys come from? And you go from the Sumerian El and those guys and their story to the Romans and the Greeks and the Norse and on and on and on. And as civilization grows, our gods become different, but we still have to have gods. And gods, that's plural. And then we're told that you can only talk to God through his representative in the church. And frankly, I prefer a direct line. So, and it seems to me that it's important for the human spirit to know there is a source, the divine. But it's not important for there to be there is a one-on-one, because we're part of it. We have a part of the divine inside of us, so there is that connection to cosmic wisdom and understanding. But it's not those earlier in the Old Testament. They obviously had free will, but so do we, and we use it differently. So there's such a difference between the Old Testament and today. And I'm not going to say the New Testament, because my philosophy is read the red stuff and let the rest of it go.
Jesus did not come here to teach Christianity. He came here to teach truths and spiritual development. That's what he came to teach. I mean, I'm not even sure he used the word Christianity. That's something we made up.
Comes
you
from his
mentioned
name.
that things change. Dr. Joseph Lumpkin, he would tell you that religions evolve and morph, changing with the social pressures, absorbing various beliefs customs and practices from converts and those whom the practitioners live. So it was with Judaism. And that has all morphed in, as you say, to blend the best it could with the Greek philosophy, to be bound in the one book, the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, it's fascinating because as a species, as we have evolved and developed, things we have not understood, we weave a story around them so they're easier to understand. Way in the beginning, we didn't understand fire. It was a gift from the gods because it came from the sky, so we worshipped it. And I think we are still in that same place today. We worship things we don't understand. And you know, you can't tell me that people aren't addictive and don't worship money, because they do. Credit cards and things like that. It's something we worship in many ways. And so I think we're still doing the same thing, but as far as the faith and the element of the divine, that seems to be taking a back seat, and I think it's a shame, because personally I think that's where our strength comes from, that's where our power comes from, that's what the magic inside of us, where our intuition and our creativity come from. But it's not somebody that's going to tell us what to do. It's going to help us create situations to learn. That's all.
Preach on, sister. I totally agree.
So where did all these gods, quote unquote, come from? I mean, were they real people? Were they interdimensional travelers? Were they, who were the Sumerians and the Romans and the Greeks? Who were those gods? Are they just fables?
They all came from the sky, which means heaven. So some people would say they came from the Seven Sisters or the Pleiadians, or I've read so many books. It could be Cygnus, it could be Sirius, it could be all these other places, Orion, that some of these people came from, and there were different crafts involved and different type beings involved, but they were all considered gods, and they could all fly. So I think that's the best way I could answer your question.
Well, and they weren't all loving either, because when you stop and think about it, especially with the Vimanas in India, they had wars like crazy. I mean, they were blowing stuff up right, left, up, and down. We have actual
wars in heaven, that's for sure.
Well, and not only that, but there are places where, especially in the Holy Land, there are places where the sand has been melted into glass because of, they think, possibly nuclear explosions. So they were cultures.
I've seen that.
Yeah, there were cultures that probably got off on being worshipped and took advantage of. But would that also include the Nephilim? I mean, were those considered from another planet as well? And how do they fit into the gods of Greek and Roman and Sumeria? How do the Nephilim fit into the whole story?
That's a very good question. I mentioned that in my first book. The people who write all these different versions of the Bible do not know what to make of Genesis 6. It's just a plethora of. Some people think the Nephilim were dark angels, and other people think they were sons of God, that they came from the sky. Other people think, well, they were actually the giants. I just read that the other day, but we really don't know. But what we do know is that sons of God came down. There again, it's plural. Sons, plural, came down and impregnated the pretty women here. so that's about what we know. And then perhaps giants were created as a result of that. And perhaps, we don't know this for sure, but perhaps the flood came to either, do away with the giants or do away with the sons of God who misbehaved. I mean, I can't give you a concrete answer. There's so much information out there that's conflicting.
Or an asteroid hit the planet and the flood came from an asteroid and had nothing to do with the gods.
Well, that could be one thing, but we could have had a pole shift. We could have had a severe earthquake and continents move. We could have had a severe tidal or tsunami. We could have had a continent sink. Just think if you had a massive volcanic eruption and all the magma came from underneath and was put out miles away, and then the continent sank because the magma was part of holding up the continent. As the continent sinks, instantly you would have a tidal wave around the whole Earth.
I one day was thinking about all of, especially Genesis, and thinking, what if millennia ago there was a contest like there was with Shelley and all of those guys. One weekend they got together, got drunk, and said, let's have a contest and see who can write the best horror story. What if, way in the past, a whole bunch of guys got together and they were bored and they thought, let's create a religion and just for the hell of it, see what we can do with it. And they all got together and they wrote all this stuff. And then they sealed it away so that whoever their superior was didn't find it. And they created religion. Just because they were, fooling around. What if somebody who was really important sat down and created what they thought the religion of today should be and sealed it away, and thousands and thousands of years ago that record is found, and they take it as the reality of the religion of the time. It could happen.
It could happen.
It's just, their humanity is so open to being influenced, wanting to know there's a power above them. And there is a source of all creation. There is a big G. There is a big God, a consciousness that is not a person, but is a source. And I think that's where most people
has no gender. Let's mention that. There's no gender.
Oh, yeah.
With the big G.
Yeah, and that's why I think that's where most people don't want to accept that, because they want it to be a nice old man with a long white beard that loves everybody. But it's not that. That's not the purpose of quote unquote God. I mean, it's
you are so correct. And God does not need a craft to fly around in.
No. And that's
land on
that's
mountains
where
and be covered by clouds.
That's where a lot of the Bible, to me, the Old Testament, is just doesn't work. The angels, came down a ladder. They came down this, or they beamed down, or whatever. I mean, a spiritual essence like that is ever present, everywhere. It doesn't need a body, and I think that's people want it to have a physicality so they can relate to it. I think that's what it is.
You could very well be correct. You could very well be correct.
It's hard to conceptualize, and you kind of want to. There's a rabbi that's written a book, and he talks about God sitting on a bench talking to him, and I can relate to that. But the reality is, you can do it anywhere. I mean, every now and then I sit down and I talk to God. He's not sitting next to me, but I know that I'm putting my thoughts out there. I'm verbalizing them so I'm better able to understand them. The purpose of the conversation is me to understand where I'm coming from, not where a source is coming from. And, nobody wants to realize that they're totally responsible for what's going on in their life.
Now it's somebody else's fault.
Yeah, I mean, I never would have signed on for this. This has to be somebody else that made this up, and I obviously signed on the dotted line because I'm here, but, I didn't agree to this. But it's a journey.
I use the Coin Greek. I'm sorry. I use the Coin Greek Bible now for the New Testament, which is a 20-year work, which basically has the original Greek. You would be surprised to know how many phrases are in this Bible that say you have the choice, by choice. And the second word they use a lot is continuously, by choice and continuously. And both of those have been taken out for what's in the New Testament today in a typical Bible. Forget choice and forget anything happening continuously. I mean, it's once saved, always saved, and things of that nature. But it's a different flavor altogether from and I highly recommend it to our listeners. It's called The Pure Word, and it's also very, very eye-opening.
Well, I think that today everybody is searching for something. I keep hearing, the phrase, I have a calling. And I think it's appropriate. I think we all have a calling, but the calling is to grow, is to continue to grow no matter how old you are. There's always something to learn. Some of it's not so much fun.
Always. And you're still going to make mistakes along the way.
Well, something, if you don't make mistakes, you're not growing. I mean,
and you're
if
not
you were
learning.
perfect, yeah, I mean, if you were perfect, you wouldn't be here. I don't know where you'd be, but you wouldn't be here because this is a school. This is where the essence of your spirit takes physical form and is able to experience emotions and all sorts of all sorts of weird situations, and there's a physicality to it. If you're just in spirit, you're in an etheric form, and while you can conceptualize, you can't experience. So we have to be able to have a physical form in order to experience pain and sorrow and grief and love and joy and all of those emotions that I don't believe etherically, they're probably available, but in a different way. I don't know.
Dr. Barry Downing would say that this earth that we're on is actually just a terrible testing place. But I see exactly what you're saying, and I totally agree. You need to have that emotional input for development and evolution of the spirit.
And there are moments when I, grit my teeth and say, did I need to repeat this lesson again? Are you sure? Check your book, because I'm pretty sure I had it figured out before. And, not happy going through it again. So, we draw to ourselves situations that will allow us to grow and that will allow us to achieve things we would like. I mean, you can pray to be gifted with something, but in essence, you're not gifted with that object. You are given the opportunity to grow towards it and achieve it yourself. I think most people don't understand that.
Let's talk about growing for just a second. And
sure.
let me also back up. If I mentioned Joshua built an altar, I really meant Jacob. I get the two interchanged, and I shouldn't. It's really Jacob who made the altar to El. But when we talk about growing, there again, from what I am doing now in respect to growing, is something completely different than the church views as growing. That this is my take, but the church views growing as submission and leaning on Christ to do things for you. And now for me, my growing is understanding Christ as a teacher, understanding my spirit now, understanding that I'm a small God, understanding what my place is, and understanding that I need to develop myself. I need to be the one to develop, not leaning on Christ. But I have to have a take in this. I have to have a part. That's part of growing. And that's something that the church just leaves out completely now.
Well, and I think the other thing the church leaves out, I mean, I truly believe that Jesus had human form and he was on the planet and he was a human being as well as the Son of God. You know, he was both. But while he was physically on the earth plane, they don't, to me, give him, I don't see him as he had to be human like the rest of us. He had to stub his toe and curse from time to time. He had to take joy and laugh. He had to have a sense of humor, I hope. You know, he was teaching disciples, trying to, but he was having a terrible time. He appeared to be frustrated with them more than anything else. And he was trying to share his wisdom, and yet he was, you know, bucking up against people who had a very primitive sense of what life was. So, you know, it must have been frustrating. He must have, you know, kicked a bench now and then. He must have, you know, we only know about 3.5 years of his life. We don't know the first 30 for sure. He did travel in Tibet, I know for sure, because Nicholas Roerich, when he was touring the Himalayas, was at a monastery there, and they had it was sort of like a guest book, I guess, but they literally had reference to the fact that Jesus had been there.
Oh, I'm totally convinced that he was in India as well.
Mhm. But you know, I mean, he didn't walk on clouds. He scuffed along in the dirt like the rest of us. He was human, but he had total awareness of spirit inside of him, which is something we strive for. But he was in human form. He experienced human stuff, and you don't see it in the Bible. You just don't. And I think it makes it harder for some people to understand that you know, he was hungry. He ate the wrong food and threw up like lots of us do. I mean, he did all the human things. He did all the human things. He was a rabbi. He was a teacher. That meant, as far as I'm concerned, he was married. But, you know, they don't say that in the Bible.
No, they don't, but I would agree with you.
So what I would like, you know, I mean, there's no way to change it or anything, but there has to be there have been a number of authors that have tried. They've tried to interview him, you know, but they, you know, they come up with something that doesn't feel human. It doesn't feel, you know, if I could walk on water, if I could, you know, heal the sick and raise the dead, they'd probably build a church to me instead of just listening to me saying, you can do it. This is how you work on yourself. This is something that, I mean, the human energy system is capable of so much more than we use it for. And I think we've been dumbed down horrifically because of that. We are
so
electromagnetic.
So true.
You know, we're electromagnetic beings. We only use 6 to 10% of our brain. The rest of the brain is there, and it's not empty space. There's stuff going on there, and we have to find out a way to utilize that energy to, I don't know, not to bend spoons, but certainly energetically, we might be able to do healing. We might be able to use, sound to lift big blocks of stone. I think that as a human culture or species, we did create a lot of the huge structures that are on the Earth plane, but we used techniques that we've forgotten about. We're capable of doing so much more than we actually do.
What you're saying is that we were smarter. What you're saying is we were smarter in the past than we are now.
I think so.
We were more in tune with ourselves in the past than we are now.
And nature.
And I think that's very true.
And, trying to get people
Wouldn't you like to know who taught Paul for those 3 years when he was in Saudi Arabia? I mean, Paul was the persecutor of Christians, a mere tent maker, and then he goes to Saudi Arabia because he had the same paradigm shift that you and I had after seeing a craft in the sky on the Damascus Road.
Yeah.
But look, those 3 years, he was able to look at Elymas and blind him, and he was able to bring Eutychus back from the dead. He had powers he did not have before, just in 3 years of teaching. So we don't have the teachers anymore. It's sure not the church. We just don't have the teachers for us to gain this ancient history, this ancient knowledge that once we did have, but we've lost it. We've completely lost it.
Well, I think it's still there. It's just, we haven't found it inside. It's there. I think that we are.
Well, yeah, we have the ability.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think basically the church, more than anything else, has taught us that we don't have that power, and that therefore we should look to the church in order to do these things for us. And that's where I have difficulty, because anytime you have a middleman,
what you said.
If there's a middleman,
you have to do
he's the one that gets rich.
You have to do it through the church.
Yeah.
And the middleman, yep, that's exactly what happened. And the church was full of greed, and what comes with greed is problems. And that's mentioned in my first book as well, and that's really what created the Protestant Reformation.
Well, look at the contest that Moses had with Pharaoh's magicians. I mean, they could do many of the same things that Jesus did, and I think that they had the power to do it, but they didn't know what to do with it. I mean, certainly, having frogs and locusts, swarm is not something that, could be of benefit to anybody. It's a good trick. But if they had the power to do that, they would have had the power to do everything else he did had they had the right training.
Exactly.
Because they were on their way.
Exactly.
They were on their way. So it's sort of like, okay, so there have been people through time that have been able to do this stuff. And I'm not sure. There's nowhere to get the training, because if there were a school, that would mean that everybody learns it the same way, and I don't think that's the case. That's just me.
And we would have people walking on water. We would have people moving mountains. We would have people turning water into wine, and the list goes on and on. And Jesus in John 14 says, not only will we do what he did, but we'll do work greater than what he did. Well, either he's a liar, or that's referring to a future life, and we're not supposed to have a future life because you just have this one life, and you better get it right. You got to be born again. You got to be saved. You got to confess. You got to be baptized. I honestly believe the serpent was correct you will not die. And that's exactly what it says. And then the church interprets or makes a theory or a conjecture that, well, that must mean spiritual death because that fits, the mantra or the dogma of their philosophy. So the fact is we don't die. You and I know that. And we've been alive before. The Bible even says God knew Jeremiah before. And they take that into saying, well, God knew all of us before. And it's because we came from the realm where God is. And, my understanding is now that that's where we go back to when we pass from this life.
Well, I think the term born again for me means that after this life I will be born again into another life.
Well, that's what it means for me. I think we've got it all interpreted wrong. I mean, I made a point of this in Within Grasp. You look at Dismas, the fellow to the right of the cross at Golgotha. He didn't proclaim Jesus as his Lord and Savior and asked to be born again and ask Jesus into his heart and make a public confession and was never baptized as far as we know. One simple sentence, and Jesus says, "You'll be in paradise with me today." And he's, did nothing to improve society his whole life. At least that's what we, gather. But then you have Nicodemus, who's really wanting to know this Jesus and sneaking out to get training. And then Jesus tells him he has to be born again. And so we take that saying we all have to be born again. And what that means is to be born spiritually. But I'm like you, totally. I think you take that literally. I think we all need to be born again, unless we have become masters.
And there are times
and I don't think you and I have.
Well, there are. For me, there are lifetimes that you have decided to struggle. And then there are lifetimes where the option is given you to, you always have the opportunity, you always have the free will and the choice, but sometimes we need to really experience difficult and uncomfortable things. And so it seems to me that the potential for having that kind of awareness is always there. But situations don't always present themselves so we can reach into it and utilize it. And I think the more awareness is with you, the greater the opportunity is to touch into that aspect, but not to be controlled by someone else or something else, but to utilize it yourself to make yourself better so that you enhance those around you and your reality because of your presence, not because necessarily of your teaching, but of how you live your life and have been an example as to the magic and the beauty and the love of the infinite. And so to me, the born again makes great sense. It's, well, you're going to come back and do it again, and maybe you'll do even better next time.
And, there's no guarantee you're even going to come back here or even be in a human body. You could even be on another planet in some other type of a body. It still may have the arms and the legs and the brain and whatnot, but there's no guarantee that you'll be back here because, this big God is over everything. And since we are little gods on the path of learning, it might behoove us to do something a little different.
Well, and not only but I think...
You mentioned some people need to experience some of these things.
Yeah.
I guess a fellow by the name of Gary Zukav, who wrote the book, The Seed of the Soul, back in the 80s. It's a wonderful book. It touches on reincarnation and all kinds of things. But he makes a very astute observation, and it never clicked with me until recently. He says, don't feel sorry for somebody. if you see them crawling in the gutter. That may be their calling. That may be something they came here because they needed to experience it. Don't interfere. And that really resonates with me now. And like Jesus says, you're always going to have the poor. Always.
Yeah.
And it makes me think that based on some other books I have read that really connect with me. One is Journey of Souls by Newton, Dr. Newton. But we may have a say-so in this life. And as you know, with passing through to, with your own experience, when you do pass into the spiritual realm, that you always have this guide, and you will discuss, of course, what's happened here, but then you will reformulate what you need to do to continue on the road to improvement and betterment and enlightenment. And so you may just have a say-so. There'll certainly be an open discourse on what your next life involves. And I totally believe that. I totally believe that.
Yeah, I mean, if I early on had been told what I would be doing in my 70s and beyond, I would have told you were crazy. It's not going to happen.
Well, that's like me. If you would have told me I would have ended up writing when I didn't even like to write, I would have told you that you were crazy. But things change.
But I think one thing that I talk with people about, and I always get blank stares, and I keep hoping that sooner or later somebody will realize what I'm talking about. If, let's say, you reincarnate on a different planet, a different solar system, a different dimension, most probably you're not going to have a religion involving Jesus Christ. Probably there will be an aspect of understanding or worship of some sort. There will be a spiritual, possibly, philosophy. But Jesus is not going to be history there. And people say, oh, no,
correct.
But he's not.
Jesus is not the only Son of God. We're all sons and daughters of God. And
it just, and I get blank stares, and it's like, of course he's in every galaxy. Of course, no, God is in every galaxy, absolutely. But our traditions, our Greek, Roman, Norse, Christianity, Native Americans, none of that is going to be on another planet in another dimension. It's going to be a whole new ballgame, but the element of faith will undoubtedly be there in some form.
Correct. That is so true.
But when you stop and think about it,
faith has a foundation that transcends the dimensions, and faith seems to be a foundational. How do I want to say this? A foundational building block of the actual spirit.
Well, when you go back way back in our history, written history, to some of the Irish folklore going way back, and I'm talking way, way, way back, they did not have a religion, but they had a belief, and the Milky Way was the pathway of souls. And so they had a philosophy and understanding, but not something they worshipped. It was an understanding that there is a soul or spirit that moves on. They had that belief, but it was not a religion. It was a faith that they lived. And so, and that's really the basic, the way we should be, to live the faith in the belief system and not worship it, but become it.
So true.
Yeah, it would be good thing if that
I
happens.
constantly think of the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Egyptians and their passing, through to the next world. Kind of goes hand in hand with that.
Yeah, there's a book I can't now. Mark will be able to tell me who wrote it, but Path of Souls is the book, and I don't want to give the wrong author to it because I have I want to say, God, is it Laird Scranton? Maybe Mark is listening. It's Greg Little. Thank you, Mark. See, he is listening. It's Path of Souls, and Greg Little wrote it. And it does talk about, these early cultures that had the faith that they lived as opposed to a religion that they worshipped. And I think we need to get back to the faith in living it rather than worshiping something that is.
You're just, I think that you're attacking it from another angle, but it's really just saying that we all need to become more spiritual and a lot less religious.
I mean, if you're going to quote me chapter and verse, that's cool. I'll talk to you about the story that's there, but how does that apply to life today? How does, every now and then we're given the opportunity to do something that is just so cool and wonderful and kind and generous, and we don't always see it or recognize it. And I'm as guilty as the next person. But a week or so ago, I was in the drugstore, and there was a grandmother and her grandson, the grandson had to be 18 or 20. And they were having trouble with getting a credit card recognized, and they were struggling. And I finally said to the cashier, I'll pay whatever it is. I'll pay it. And she looked at me and she said, really? And I said, and it was like $28. And I said, yeah, I'll pay it. And then, and Merry Christmas. And they looked at me like I had 5 heads. And I said, Merry Christmas. And they couldn't believe it that somebody that they didn't know would suddenly just offer to pay for them, and all they had were soft drinks for a party they were giving, and the kid tried to give me some cash, and I said, "Don't be silly, Merry Christmas." And we get that opportunity a lot, and I'm as guilty as the next person. But I looked at the struggles they were going through.
I know, but it's the little things like that you do in life that mean so much.
Oh. Yeah, their mouths were hanging open like, what's wrong with her? It was just, it was like, oh, they shouldn't struggle. They shouldn't, this is terrible. And, I just said, I'll pay for it. It's not that big a deal here. But you do that every now and then, and you get such a warm feeling. And they had a warm feeling too. So, now that was cool, and it didn't cost me anything really, but it was the kind of gesture that makes you feel good, and if you can do those feel good gestures enough, life changes dramatically for you. Now I'm not going to.
I say that you just stored up a treasure in heaven when you do that.
Well, I'm also not going to
karma.
always pay.
Actually, that's karma to me, because I do believe in karma.
Well, I do too, and it wasn't done with that intent, but it probably is good karma. But and I'm certainly not going to always pay for the groceries of the person in front of me or stuff like that. But every now and then, if you see a situation like that is so easy for you to help, and to do it instead of being oblivious to those people around you, just helping and sharing, it makes you feel so good. It really does. I mean, it puts a smile on your face for a stupid reason. So, but, I think we have that opportunity, but we don't often recognize it at the time and do something with it. And
well,
names
for the rest of my life now, I'm sorry. I think for the rest of my life now that I'm going to focus on 2 things, and that is feeding the poor and clothing the hungry. And I'll do that in whatever capacity, I can do that in. I've already cleaned out all of my clothes out of 3 closets. and donated them away. And, I donate funds to certain nonprofits that feed the hungry. And that's part of my calling now, that I feel that, and that's what Jesus did. I mean, that's biblical if you want to go that route, but it does make you feel good. I could have sold those clothes for many, many hundreds of dollars, even on eBay or something, but just giving them away to somebody that needed them makes you feel good.
What do you think, Jesus as a man, knowing that, he had a calling, he certainly had visions from time to time, and prior to his ministry, he didn't walk on water and heal the sick, and but what do you think his intent was? I mean, here he had this talent, this gift, and all we know are the words that people have put in his mouth, basically. What do you think when he realized that there was a mission, a calling, he thought? I mean, there was a human part of him as well as a spiritual.
Well, the human part, I think, struggled with his spiritual part. You get that, when he cries, when he sweats blood, the Garden of Gethsemane, things of that nature. And then at one point, depending on which book you read, he cries out, "Why have you forsaken me?" But I think that's something we all experience, is the battle back and forth between the physical and the spirit. But he came, I believe, realizing that the spirit wins out over the physical, in the long term, and that we're all spiritual beings, and that we all do indeed live on, regardless of what we're taught. We live on, and we will be continuing on our journey. Hopefully not making the same mistakes over and over, but we will continue on our journey. I liken it to us being in kindergarten now, and when you die, you're not into graduate school immediately. I mean, let's put it that way. We've got a lot to learn. Still, a lot to absorb, and even our thoughts. I mean, actions are one thing. What we allow into our brains is another thing. And everything we say and everything we do and everything we think is actually recorded and known in heaven. So there's no secrets down here. None.
No.
That's biblical too. And so everything we've done and everything we think is going to be presented to us from this lifetime. So knowing all that, certainly I would hope would put, a lighted match under some people, to get their act together, that, ought to be exploring or searching for more truth instead of being led around with blinders on.
But, those people that follow, for want of a better word, religiously, the Bible is actually literally the Word of God. And I know that I spoke with someone that said, that the Bible was inspired writing, written by God, and He's not going to write any more. And, I said at the time, but I've been inspired and creative and written, and I definitely think that the stuff that I, quote-unquote, channeled or was inspired to write came from a very spiritual source. And you're telling me that the divine will not influence this reality with inspiration if we are open to it. And I think that's the big deal. You can write spiritual stuff, and it's well written and stuff like that. But if you're inspired and you allow it to flow from you, then it takes on a whole new level of teaching, not only you but anybody who reads it. So I cannot believe that the divine has decided to not write any more than just the Bible. That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, inspiration and creativity is open to everyone if they allow it to flow through them.
Well, I'll let you in on a little secret. The divine did not write the Bible.
He's not getting royalties?
The way that it is flavored now is really due to Sir Francis Bacon, who rewrote a lot of the stuff that's in there, as well as some of the other religious people of the time, such as Tyndale and whatnot. But it came through man, and once it comes through man and gets deciphered, and then gets translated, and then goes through the line of transmission, and then gets interpreted. It's just like saying something in your proverbial grade school. You start off with one chair, and by the time it doesn't even have to get to the end. It could be the third or fourth person. It's something completely different. It seldom makes it to the end of the classroom. So I mean, and these people couldn't even write back then. You had to have a scribe. So right there is one layer of transmission, and that scribe is he writing everything this person meant to say? Is he writing it, allegorically? Is he writing it, exactly the way he said it? And then from there it goes. You have pieces of parchment. You have other people looking at it. It gets changed around. It did get changed around multiple times. And, depending on where you live, it's being changed today. If you live in Denmark, your Bible's being changed today. The word Israel's been taken out completely.
Well, not only that, but
the reasoning they use that is because the Israel today is nothing like the Israel back then.
Well, no, and the reality, too, is with interpretations, it depends upon the level of awareness of the person and their vocabulary, how they put it down. And it's like hieroglyphics, too. I have learned that their different symbols mean different things, and depending on the level of awareness of the person making the interpretation can be, just totally different from someone else who's interpreting
it. Day and night. Another thing is the big G God doesn't write. The only thing that the little G God wrote were the Ten Commandments twice, but that was really just by the local God of Israel. That's all that God wrote.
Well, and there were 615 laws, too. I mean, but the Big Ten are there, definitely. That's probably all they figured they could fit on the tablets. It's kind of like,
you could only take so many steps on Sabbath day. If you took one step too many, you've broken the law.
Exactly.
I mean, they had all kinds of stuff like that.
Oh, and the Puritans, where you couldn't do any work on the Sabbath, and if you picked beans in the garden for dinner, you were fined. You were censured because that was work. Now, come on. What were you supposed to do? I mean, obviously pray, but
Jesus healed on Sabbath.
Mhm. Well, so I think that I'm hopeful that in these times that are so turbulent and so changing, that people are getting more and more in touch with their inner journey and their faith than the price of gas, the price of food, and everything else. I think we're being challenged to grow and develop in a very physical way, and yet maybe it's a good thing for us. Maybe it's a good thing that computers were down and people could really spend time with their thoughts. Though the silence got so loud, it was incredible when there was no internet and no phone and things like that. But it's there is wonderful material inside of us, and to build on. I think that's another thing. I mean, build on some of the foundations that we've got, and while some of the foundations aren't as solid as they could be, you certainly can get greater strength by putting a better foundation under you to grow from. And it doesn't mean that you are going against a religion, but you're enhancing your faith, and there's a difference.
I agree. I make mention of the fact that I've learned to meditate, something I did not learn previously, and I've learned that meditation in many ways is the opposite direction of praying. When you pray, you're going from within out. And I've learned that meditation is taking what's there and going in and developing what's in. It's like going the opposite way. And meditation now is something I do just as much as praying. And this meditation, in many ways, it's gotten me to know myself.
Isn't it, praying for me is talking, and meditation is listening.
That's one way to look at it, for sure. I've never heard it quite mentioned that way, but it certainly makes sense. You be real quiet when you meditate, and you become in touch with your senses, in touch with who you are. Where if you're praying, you're using your brain and you're asking someone, whether it's Jesus or Yahweh or the big G God, to do something for you or in His name. And meditating is developing, for me, let's say enlightening. And evolving in teaching your soul. And as that soul becomes more evolved, then you won't have to rely on Jesus or a God to do something for you. And that's where I think we're really falling short. We are all cutting ourselves short if you're just being led around with what you're being taught on Sundays. We are all little gods. And we have, as you say, the powers within us. They're just not developed. And you can read the Bible from front to back, multiple times and study it. Unfortunately, I don't think you're going to get the answers out of there because it's been weeded out. All the Gnostic stuff is gone. I mean, that was the big thorn for the early church, and it's gone. But you've got to realize this for yourself and look at things, as I say in both books, through a different lens. And in doing so, I mean, the blinders come off, the weights come off your shoulders. You experience freedom, as I've mentioned before, in spades, and the whole world just. You look at the world in a different light. You realize that you are part of everything, and everything is a part of you, and everything's connected one way or the other. You realize that we all vibrate at different frequencies, and it's just everything changes. And
it does.
In doing that, you feel like you know that. You're more in tune to the big God. You're more in tune to the spiritual realm than you were before. And that's what I have come to realize in these last 6 years is that life now is a spiritual journey for me. It's not what house you live in or who your friends are or what job you have or how long or where you went to school, or as you say, how many degrees you have. I can't even remember half the stuff I was taught anyway. It's useless, completely useless.
Yeah.
But all that stuff's minutia. It just gets in the way of your real development. I'm probably rattling, but
no, I think it's, what you say is very, very true, and I think that when you get to a point where you recognize that, it helps you to grow. I have friends that have degrees up the wazoo, and yet they don't seem to understand the purpose of life. It's, degrees are great. I mean, if you're in teaching especially, you get bumps in salary every time you get a certain number of extra credits in one way or another. I mean, they make it almost important for you to continue your education. But when you look at, if you look at education today, it's worthless. And that's just
you're right about that.
I mean, I'm an ex-school teacher. I taught special ed for 25 years. I think our school system is terrible, and but happily, everybody has the ability to teach themselves anything. I mean, you may not be great at it, but you have the ability to learn it. I have wanted to learn how to play the piano.
You have to want to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it's the same way with spirituality. You can take classes, you can take workshops, you can do all sorts of stuff. But if you want someone to, do something for you, I mean, getting a certificate does not prove that you've achieved anything. It's just that you've spent money. That's why a bachelor, bachelor's is BS, and then MS is more of the same, and the PhD is piled higher and deeper. I mean, it's just paper. It doesn't say you have the wisdom of the ages at all. And there are people that just, teach themselves, that read their books, that assimilate material and make it a part of their lives, that become the masters of wisdom, as opposed to, a notebook full of credentials that doesn't get you anything.
It's so true, and I would add on to that. For me, the nail in the coffin is what we're taught here in the Bible Belt. Once saved, always saved. Accept Jesus Christ once and all, and you're going to be walking on streets of gold, and He'll be wiping your tears away, and you have a eternity of life with Him. Well, that pretty much destroys any sense of you developing yourself while you're here. You're already home free because you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. You've professed Him, publicly. You've asked to be born again and invited Him into your heart. You've been baptized, and that pretty much kills your individual work, your individual.
Yeah.
You know what I'm getting at for your spirit and soul development, because you think you're already home free. You've done everything you need to do in this lifetime. You found Jesus Christ.
Yeah, you can cruise from then on in until next life. I mean, I've had people say to me,
they don't believe that. They don't believe that.
No.
You have this one life only. That's why you got to get it right now.
Well,
I've had
people.
You've got to come to know Jesus as your Lord and Savior. If you don't, you're going to burn up in hell.
Well, I've had people say to me, this is my last life. I'm totally evolved. I won't have to come back again, and I'm not coming back again. And there was a time where I would argue with those people, and then I realized that was foolish. And so I usually say, when someone tells me that this is their last evolution on Earth, I would say, well, you're absolutely right. Your personality will not come back, but your spirit may have another idea. So, it's kind of like, okay, so this personality is done. it's a winter coat you've outgrown, and next time you will come back with a different winter coat on. But you will come back somewhere, somehow. I did want to get into a little bit more of your sighting of the UFO. What do you think the purposes of the UFOs are? Are they watching? Are they here to serve? Are they here to enlighten? What is, at this point in time, what do you think they're for?
Well, when you say this point in time, they actually go back before Christ. I think they've always been here. I mean, that's an established fact. Whether or not we see them is another thing. But I think they're here observing. I think they're here to protect us. They're sure not here to destroy us. We're still here. I think many of them are explorers, and I believe some of them are actually our own crafts, because I do believe, there's a little bit of a conspiracy in me, here we go, but I do believe in a secret government. I do believe we've already been off the planet. I believe we have crafts that move along in the sky that are cloaked, that we've developed that from, engineering, backwards engineering, or reverse engineering, I think is the correct term, that we have this. It just can't be presented to the public because of religion, for one thing, and because of what would happen with the almighty dollar, for another thing. So I guess I just answered your question. It's a combination. We're explorers, protectors, watchers. There's another biblical term, and some are ours. So it's a combination, perhaps, of all of them. So there you have it.
Yeah, that does make it does
they're
make
out
sense.
There is the main thing, and the church wants to pretend they're not out there, so they just don't talk about it. The government, covers it up, and it's not talked about in theology schools. So we've got to come to realize it ourselves. And I think the more people that see these crafts, and there again, it may be a good thing we have cell phones with instant cameras and computers, because, it's no longer, taboo or scary to talk about it. People don't think you're crazy anymore if you've seen a craft or have had visitations or know somebody that has. Lots of people, and I've realized this myself just sitting at a table mentioning something that I saw, you get them to open up now that they saw something back in, let's say, 1964 in Tennessee. I had a fellow just do that to me the other day. That it's funny that he said it's funny you bring that up, because I haven't told too many people this, but I saw a UFO once back that was huge, that was miles across, and I just saw it for a little bit, and then it took off. And it's amazing that what people have seen, and it goes back to antiquity. So we know the crafts are here, and we can speculate, on the purpose and where they come from. But the only thing we know for sure is they're not here to kill us or destroy us. And if they are, then we're fighting out in space somewhere, like some other people would say, maybe Corey Goode or somebody like that we're already in war out in space. But they're not making it here to destroy us.
No, that's true. I think I agree with you that the term watcher appeals to me greatly. I think that the Rendlesham Forest incident had to do with a craft would have appeared to come from the future, 8,100 years in the future from us, which, gives me great hope for humanity. It would seem that we didn't totally destroy ourselves. but
or you could make the case it came from an off-world.
That too.
an off-world society.
Mm-hmm.
But this plays in hand with reincarnation. My studies have taught me that time does not exist, especially when you're in these crafts. And I mentioned that within grasp, a scenario that if you go out, a third of a parsec into space in one of these crafts, and then you turn around and come back, and you're traveling so fast, nobody would know you when you got back to Earth.
Well,
that's happened in cultures around the world too. These people in these crafts, people have been taken up and come back, and the time's completely different.
Well,
time
look
doesn't
in the
exist.
Bible.
Einstein has proven that.
But in the Bible, when was it Enoch taken up, and when he returned, that hundreds of years had passed? I mean, that says the same thing. He was off planet. It didn't seem like very long, and when he came back, hundreds of years had passed. I mean, happily then they lived to be 900 years old, so he still had friends. But
that's another thing. You wonder how these people lived to be so long or so old, and you have these ships in Egypt, and there's cases where people have come back, and nobody knows them, but they just thought they were gone for a very short while.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean,
so time does not exist. That's why we live eternally. That's why we have to try to comprehend infinity. And one of Reverend Michael Carter's favorite comments, or most enlightening comments for me, and I put it in my book, he says, the finite will never comprehend infinity. And that is so true.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's sort of like, there is...
We live eternally.
Yeah, it's a never-ending story. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I mean, there are cycles of what, as a species, we get involved in, but it is never-ending. There is constantly growth and movement forward, and cultures rise and fall, and we go back to the Stone Age, and then we grow up again. I'm fascinated more with a lot of stuff that goes before the last ice age. I'm curious as to what were those cultures that have been now totally wiped out, and yet we're beginning to find cities underwater and under Antarctica. Because there was
Antarctica.
So that there are definitely, on the surface, they are seeing what appear to be villages, but underneath the ice. I mean, that was once a tropical area. It was once near the equator. So when they get to find a landmass,
you wonder how fast it moved. Did the continent move, or did the planet tilt?
I think probably a little bit of both. I mean, they've got miles and miles of ice there, and those tunnels that they have found underneath the ice almost to me look like magma tunnels. That the volcanoes, when they're erupting, the magma tubes have created. So I am so curious as to what the bare ground looks like, and some of the maps that go way, way back. The Parisi map, I think, is one of them. I mean, it describes Antarctica as with no ice. So,
and look at the woolly mammoths that are found with warm season flowers in their stomach. It's like they were frozen instantly.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of things that have happened to this planet that we have absolutely no knowledge of, and that's where my curiosity goes. It's kind of like I'd like to go back a million years.
Your curiosity plays out because I've seen your video about the stones, and it's one of these enigmas that if you don't understand it, we better not talk about it. I was actually floored by it. You're taught that the pyramid had all these big stones, but your research and video that I saw on YouTube was I just watched it intently and learned. You wonder who did that.
Yeah, and
what the
I have to say,
was.
I mean, I did write it and narrate it, and it was basically channeled material. It was, the words just came. It was something that had to be out there. Now, it's out there, and people will see it and watch it or not. But hopefully it stirs
You wonder if
people.
some of that same culture came from Ireland and went over to Iceland and made its way into Canada and into the New England states. I'm just kind of sort of wondering if it's the same culture.
Well, there's one stone that had some Ogham written on it. The Ogham goes back to Ireland, which goes back to the Druids, which goes back to the Tuatha De Danann, and again a case of gods, which is magical. And the Tuatha had the ability to utilize energy to raise stones and to move stones, and it's a fascinating culture. So I think that if you go pre-flood, pre-ice age, back that far, that the cultures you might discover would be, better stories than Atlantis and Lemuria for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of would like to get an idea as to what was, because all of our biblical stuff and everything comes within the last flood. That's all of our human history there. That's all we got. And they did a study and they found that the human DNA is older than the planet. So we had to come from somewhere, and we were transplanted here for some reason. But I'd really like to, that's where my real curiosity is. All of this stuff is wonderful, but there has to be a way of going backwards in time and seeing what kind of cultures were there, what kind of belief systems they had, and what was their theory on faith and the origin of time and space and things like that. So, don't know if ever it'll be discovered, but somewhere it has to. It's got to be there. We keep finding things that come out of nowhere that give us an insight into other times, and I'm just waiting. I'm hopeful it'll happen in my lifetime, but I'll come back and check it out. It doesn't happen this lifetime. Or when I get on the other side, I'll read a book and I'll learn it all then. But sooner or later, I'll figure it out and have other places to go and other things to do. Saying that, I was looking at, you've got a lot of things on your agenda for where you're going to be and what you're going to be doing. You want to kind of give out some of this information so people can find you again to listen to more of your wisdom?
Well, I do have a website called withingrasp.net, and you can contact me from there. You can also look up my books on Amazon from there. I've got several podcasts lined up through January. Those are listed on the website as well. And I just worked in one for tomorrow with Chris Jordan. That'll be aired probably the following week. But there's podcasts with Mark Johnson. There's Spaced Out Radio. That's the big one in Canada from midnight to 3 a.m. That's coming up, and we've got several other things on my plate right now, but I'll have them listed on the website.
You've got some impressive names here. Kate Hobson is wonderful. Dave Scott is terrific. And you're working to kind of get dates with Whitney Strieber. He's a cool author and podcaster. And so you've got a lot of people interested in the book, and so it's you've also, done Richard Surrett and George Norrie and Richard Hoagland and, a lot of other really cool people. So you're certainly getting out there, and hopefully, as you said, in some place, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear and minds to open, you're certainly putting it out there, and your wisdom will touch people at whatever level is appropriate for them to hear, which is cool. So,
well, I just want people to know that it's my path and things that I'm experiencing on my journey, and it may or may not click for them on their journey, but I want to share it because it has been such life-changing for me, in these last 6 years. So I'm just happy to have the avenue and people like you, Barbara, that allow me to share. So I am appreciative. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure, and it was also an honor to be included in your book. I mean, that was
you are
a
woman of many talents, and you have a very varied background, kind of like I do. You can talk on multiple subjects, and we really didn't get into vibrations or frequencies or NDEs. I guess we can do that perhaps in another time. But you really gave me a really good example of a third party NDE that you shared, and I'll just, without going into it, the readers can find that with the interview that you allowed me to put in the book.
Yes.
That was really, really wonderful, and I have mentioned that several times as an example of just how real these experiences are, and
they're very real.
Physically real, very real.
Yeah.
I mean, dog slobber is dog slobber. I mean, you know it.
Yes, and I only have cats,
just
so
to have
it was
an experience like that is amazing.
It was, and it was. When she asked me to go into the tunnel with her, I said sure, not thinking I could do it. So I have learned not to agree to something just because I think I can't do it anymore, because then the universe says, "Oh, let's shock her." So it was a unique experience, and one that I treasure because she was a special friend. But it was interesting reading your book and then coming to the interviews. And Michael Carter, of course, I know very well, and Barry Downing, I don't personally know, but I know of his work. So, and then to actually read the interview you did with me, and actually after I got done, reading through it, it was like, well, that isn't as bad as I thought it might have been. So,
Well, I really appreciate you spending the time with me and allowing me to touch on all those subjects and get it on paper, and then make sure I had it right on paper. That's the big thing.
And I am so impressed by the number of rewrites.
I hope the readers will find it as interesting as I did, and I believe that they will.
Well, it was fun, and I must say that I have a great deal of respect for any author, because it never occurred to me that I'd have to go over and rewrite and over and check and over and rewrite 3 or 4 times. And each time it made it better. I just, you had the whole dang book to do. I just noticed we are totally out of time. I want to thank you so much, and everybody. The book is within grasp. It's on Amazon. The link to it is on the write-up here for the show, and obviously on his website. So please check it out. It's a very good read and very enjoyable. And, of course, I think it's fabulous because I'm in it. But, aside from that, it's a great book. So thank you again. And we will get you back on to hit those other topics we missed.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. It's always my pleasure. And again, I find you quite enlightening and quite a lady of the spirit, and I call you my sister. Well,
thank you so much. I really, it's been an adventure for me as well. And as far as that goes, everybody, we're out of time, but catch us next time. You know the drill. Check out the website, top right-hand corner. It'll tell you exactly when and where we're going to be coming at you again. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Good night now.